The bullet shattered the window of Clara Owens' ranch house at dawn, splintering wood and glass across her kitchen table where she sat clutching her father's will with trembling hands. She dove to the floor, heart hammering against her ribs as more shots peppered the exterior walls. Through the broken window, she could see riders circling her property. 6 men in dark coats with bandanas pulled high across their faces. They weren't shooting to kill, not yet. This was a warning, the 3rd one this week. The message was clear. Sign over the deed to the Owens ranch or face worse than broken windows. Clara crawled toward the rifle cabinet in the corner, keeping low as another volley of bullets tore through the morning air. Her father had been dead barely 3 months. Buried on the hill overlooking the valley he'd spent 30 years building into something. The ranch sprawled across 2,000 acres of prime California grassland just outside Winnetka, with water rights to the creek that ran through it. Those water rights were worth a fortune, especially to Marcus Dalton, the railroad man who'd been buying up every inch of land between Los Angeles and the San Joaquin Valley. She grabbed her Winchester and checked the chamber. Loaded. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old, back in 1868, and now in the spring of 1885, those lessons were the only thing standing between her and complete ruin. The riders had stopped shooting. She heard horses stamping, leather creaking, the low murmur of men's voices. Then one man called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Miss Owens, we're just here to deliver a message from Mr. Dalton. He's prepared to offer you $15,000 for this property. That's more than fair, considering your circumstances." Clara rose slowly, keeping the rifle trained on the window. "My circumstances are just fine," she shouted back. "And this land isn't for sale at any price." A different voice responded, harder than the first. "You're a woman alone out here, Miss Owens. Things can happen to women alone. Accidents. Maybe a fire. Maybe worse." Her finger tightened on the trigger, but she forced herself to breathe. Shooting at Dalton's men would only give them an excuse to come back with the law, claim she'd fired first. Instead, she aimed high and put a round through the roof overhang above where the riders sat their horses. The men scattered, cursing, spurring their mounts away from the house. She fired twice more, deliberately missing, watching them retreat toward the road. But as they rode off, the hard-voiced man turned in his saddle. "You've got 3 days, Miss Owens. 3 days to reconsider, or we'll be back to reconsider for you." They disappeared in a cloud of dust, leaving Clara standing alone in her bullet-riddled house with her heart still racing and her hands shaking on the rifle stock. She couldn't stay here alone. Not anymore. Dalton had money, hired guns, and enough political influence to make her life hell. The local sheriff was in his pocket, which meant she couldn't expect help from the law. Her nearest neighbors were the Patterson family, 5 miles east, but they'd already sold out to Dalton last month. Everyone was selling. Everyone was leaving. Everyone except Clara. She spent the morning boarding up the broken windows and sweeping glass from the floor. The ranch hands she'd employed had quit 2 weeks ago, spooked by threats from Dalton's men. The cattle were still in the north pasture, but she couldn't manage them alone. She needed help. She needed someone who wasn't afraid of Marcus Dalton and his railroad money. By afternoon, she'd saddled her mare and headed into town. Winnetka was small, barely more than a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a few scattered houses. The railroad had promised to bring prosperity, and some folks believed it. Clara knew better. She'd watched Dalton's operation devour small ranches all across the territory, leaving desperate families with pennies on the dollar for land that had been in their families for generations. She tied her horse outside the saloon and pushed through the doors. The afternoon crowd was sparse, just a few cowboys drinking away their wages and a card game in the corner. The bartender, a gray-haired man named Dutch, looked up as she entered. "Miss Owens, you looking for something?" Information, she said. I need someone who knows how to handle himself. Someone who isn't scared of Dalton's men. Dutch wiped down the bar with a rag, his expression carefully neutral. That's a tall order in this town. Most folks who had that kind of spine already left or got bought out. There must be someone. He hesitated, then jerked his chin toward the back corner. There's a fellow came in yesterday asking about work. Name's Yates Owens, no relation to you I'd guess, despite the name. Cowboy. Been riding through from Arizona. Might be interested in honest work or might not. Hard to say. Clara turned to look. The man sat alone at a corner table with his back to the wall, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in front of him. He was tall even sitting down, with dark hair that curled over his collar and a weathered face that suggested he'd spent most of his 20-some years outdoors. He wore a gun low on his hip and a dusty black hat pushed back on his head. She walked over before she could talk herself out of it. Mr. Owens? He looked up, and she found herself staring into the clearest gray eyes she'd ever seen. They were the color of storm clouds, sharp and assessing as they traveled from her face to the rifle she still carried. That's right, he said. His voice was deep, with a hint of a southern drawl. And you are Clara Owens. I hear you're looking for work. Depends on the work. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down without being invited. His eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't object. I own a ranch north of town. 2,000 acres, good water, prime grazing land. I've got a problem with a railroad man named Marcus Dalton who wants to drive me off my property so he can buy it cheap. His men shot up my house this morning. They gave me 3 days to sell or face consequences. Yates Owens poured himself another shot of whiskey and drank it slowly, studying her over the rim of the glass. Sounds like you need a small army, not a drifting cowboy. I need someone who knows how to fight and isn't afraid to stand up to hired guns. I can pay fair wages plus room and board. But I'll be honest with you, Mr. Owens. This could get dangerous. Most things worth doing are dangerous. He set down the glass. What makes you think I'm the man for this job? Dutch said you came from Arizona. The way you're sitting, the way you're wearing that gun, tells me you've seen trouble before. And the fact that you're still here, still breathing, tells me you know how to handle it. A slow smile crossed his face, transforming it from merely handsome to something that made her stomach flutter unexpectedly. You're observant, Miss Owens. I'll give you that. I'm desperate, Mr. Owens. I'll give you that too. My father spent his whole life building that ranch, and I'll be damned if I let some railroad man steal it because I don't have the manpower to fight back. He leaned back in his chair, considering. How many men does Dalton have? I've seen at least a dozen. Maybe more. And you're offering what exactly? Because fair wages won't mean much if I'm dead. $50 a month, plus a percentage of the cattle sales this fall. And if we manage to hold onto the ranch, I'll deed you 100 acres of your own. That got his attention. He straightened, his eyes narrowing. That's generous. That's desperate. But it's a genuine offer. I need help, Mr. Owens. I need it badly, and I need it now. Yates was quiet for a long moment, turning the whiskey glass in his hands. Finally, he nodded. All right, Miss Owens. I'll help you. But we do this smart, not stupid. Going up against Dalton head-on will get us both killed. We need a plan. Relief flooded through her, so intense she felt momentarily lightheaded. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. We've still got to survive the next 3 days. They rode back to the ranch together as the sun began its descent toward the western hills. Clara found herself hyper-aware of Yates riding beside her. The easy way he sat his horse, the casual confidence in every movement. He asked smart questions about the property, the water rights, Dalton's operation, and the local law. By the time they reached the ranch house, She had the sense that he was already forming strategies, already thinking 3 moves ahead. He dismounted and surveyed the bullet damage with a professional eye. They were sending a message, not trying to kill you. That's good. Means Dalton still thinks you might sell. I won't. I know. But he doesn't have to know that. Yates tied his horse to the rail and climbed the porch steps. We make him think you're considering his offer. Buy ourselves some time to prepare. Prepare how? He turned to face her, and in the fading light, his features were all sharp angles and shadows. We make this place defensible. We gather information on his men. We find leverage. And if it comes to a fight, we make sure we're ready. Over the next 2 days, Clara watched Yates transform her ranch house into something resembling a fortress. He reinforced the doors with heavy timber, positioned barrels of water around the exterior in case of fire, and mapped out clear sight lines for defense. He taught her how to shoot from behind cover, how to reload quickly in the dark, how to listen for approaching riders. But it was the quiet moments that undid her. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. His expression softening from the hard mask he showed the world. The way his hand lingered on hers when he adjusted her grip on the rifle. The way he smiled when she made a joke, genuine and warm and nothing like the dangerous stranger she'd met in the saloon. On the 3rd day, Clara sent a message to Dalton saying she needed more time to consider his offer. His response came within hours. He would grant her 1 week, no more. After that, the offer was withdrawn, and she would have to face the consequences. 1 week, Yates said when she showed him the letter. That gives us a chance. A chance to do what? To prove he doesn't have legal claim to force you out. To document his threats. To gather evidence that he's been intimidating landowners all across the territory. He was standing close to her in the kitchen, close enough that she could smell leather and saddle soap and something uniquely him. And maybe to convince a few other ranchers to stand with us instead of selling. No one else will fight. They're all too scared. Maybe they just need someone to show them it's possible to win. He was looking at her with such intensity that her breath caught. Clara had never been one for romance, had never had time for courting or dances or any of the things other girls her age seemed to care about. The ranch had always come first. But standing here with Yates, with afternoon sunlight streaming through the kitchen window and his gray eyes fixed on her face, she felt something shift inside her chest. Clara, he said softly, and it was the first time he'd used her given name. I need you to know something. This isn't just about the money or the land anymore. If it was, I'd probably tell you to take Dalton's offer and start over somewhere safer. Then what is it about? He reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. It's about you, about the fact that you're the bravest woman I've ever met, about the fact that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since you walked up to my table in that saloon. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Yates, You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. He dropped his hand and stepped back, putting professional distance between them again. Now let's go talk to the Patterson family. They might have sold to Dalton, but they might also have information we can use. They rode to the Patterson place that evening. The family had already moved out, but old James Patterson was still there overseeing the last of the packing. He was a weathered man in his 60s with sad eyes and stooped shoulders. Miss Owens, he said when he saw them approaching. I'm sorry about your troubles. I heard Dalton's putting pressure on you to sell. He's doing more than putting pressure, Mr. Patterson. His men shot up my house, threatened me directly. Patterson shook his head. He did the same to us. My boy wanted to fight, but I wouldn't let him. We've got grandchildren to think about. Sometimes it's better to cut your losses. Did you get a fair price? Yates asked. Hell no. Got maybe half what the land was worth. But Dalton said if we didn't sell, He'd make sure the bank called in our loan and we'd lose it all anyway. Sheriff wouldn't help, said it was a civil matter. He spat into the dust. Civil matter, my ass. It's theft, plain and simple. Would you be willing to testify to that? Clara asked. Put it in writing what Dalton did? Patterson looked nervous. I don't know. I don't want trouble following us to Sacramento. It wouldn't be for a local court, Yates said. We're thinking bigger. Federal Land Office, maybe. Or the territorial newspapers. Make enough noise and even Dalton's money can't keep him protected. The old man was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, I'll write down what happened. You're right, it ain't proper. A man's land should be his own. They left with Patterson's written testimony and a list of 3 other ranchers who'd been forced to sell under similar circumstances. Over the next few days, Clara and Yates traveled to each one, collecting statements and building a case against Dalton's operation. But they also drew attention. On the 5th day, riders came to the ranch again more than before. Clara counted 8 men surrounding the property as she and Yates took positions inside the house. Miss Owens. It was the same hard voice from before. Your week is almost up. Mr. Dalton is losing patience. Yates called back from his position by the window. She'll give Mr. Dalton an answer when she's ready. Until then, you boys can ride on back to town. Who the hell are you? Someone who's advising Miss Owens on her legal options. You know, those rights that every landowner has under federal law. There was a pause. Then, Dalton don't care about your legal options, cowboy. He wants that land, and he's going to get it one way or another. Then he can take it up with the territorial governor and the federal land office, because we've already sent them a full report of his intimidation tactics. Yates's voice was calm, almost casual, along with testimony from every rancher he's forced out in the last 2 years. Now I'm guessing Dalton has enough money to survive some bad press. But does he have enough to survive a federal investigation? The silence stretched longer this time. Finally, the voice came back, less certain. You're bluffing. Am I? You want to test that theory? Yates chambered around loudly enough for them to hear. Or you want to ride back and tell Dalton that Miss Owens is prepared to fight this in court, in the papers, and if necessary, right here on her own property. Her choice. Clara held her breath. Through the window gap, she could see the riders conferring. Then, slowly, they turned their horses and rode away. As soon as they were gone, she let out a shaky laugh. Did we really send anything to the governor? Not yet, but we will first thing tomorrow. Yates lowered his rifle and turned to her, a grin on his face. Sometimes the threat is more powerful than the action. You're either brilliant or completely insane. Can't I be both? She laughed again, and suddenly the tension that had been coiled inside her for days released all at once. Tears sprang to her eyes, part relief, part exhaustion, part something else she couldn't name. Yates crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. Hey, it's all right. You're all right. Clara buried her face against his chest, breathing in his scent, feeling the solid warmth of him. I was so scared. I know, but you didn't show it. You stood your ground. He pulled back just enough to tilt her chin up, his gray eyes searching hers. You're incredible, Clara Owens. Absolutely incredible. And then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and nothing else mattered except the feel of his mouth on hers and his hands in her hair, and the way her heart felt like it might burst from her chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. I should apologize for that. Don't you dare. He smiled, that beautiful transforming smile that made her knees weak. Good, because I've been wanting to do that since the moment you sat down at my table. Only since then? Well, maybe I wanted to do other things first. Like figure out if you were crazy or just fearless. Turns out you're both. She laughed and kissed him again, softer this time, savoring it. We should probably write those letters. Probably, but maybe in a few minutes. They spent the evening composing detailed accounts of Dalton's intimidation campaign, along with the written testimonies they'd collected. Yates knew people at the territorial newspaper in Los Angeles, and they sent a copy there as well. By the time they finished, it was well past midnight. You should get some sleep, Yates said. I'll keep watch. You need rest too. I'll rest when this is over. He brushed his thumb across her cheek. Go on. I'll wake you if anything happens. Clara wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her. She made it to her bedroom and collapsed onto the bed fully clothed, asleep before her head hit the pillow. She woke to the sound of horses and shouting. Sunlight streamed through her window, morning well advanced. She grabbed her rifle and ran to the front of the house where Yates was already positioned at the window. But these weren't Dalton's men. These were riders wearing badges, led by a man she didn't recognize. Behind them was a buggy, and stepping out of it was a distinguished-looking gentleman in a fine suit. What's happening? Clara asked. I think, Yates said slowly, our letters worked faster than expected. The man in the suit approached the house, holding up his hands to show he was unarmed. Miss Owens? I'm Deputy Marshal Thomas Green, out of Los Angeles. I'd like to speak with you about your complaint against Marcus Dalton. Clara and Yates exchanged glances. Then she opened the door. Marshal Green was thorough and professional. He took statements from both of them, examined the bullet damage to the house, and made notes on everything they documented. When they showed him the testimonies from other ranchers, his expression grew grim. This is more extensive than we realized, he said. We've had complaints about Dalton before, but nothing this well documented. The territorial governor takes land fraud very seriously, Miss Owens. If even half of what you've reported is accurate, Dalton is looking at federal charges. So what happens now? Clara asked. Now we investigate properly. Dalton won't be able to intimidate you while we're conducting an official inquiry. I'll have men posted on your property for protection until this is resolved. He stood, tucking his notebook away. You've done a brave thing, Miss Owens. Not many people have the courage to stand up to men like Dalton. After the marshal left, Clara sank into a chair, hardly believing it was real. Is it over? Is it really over? Yates sat beside her and took her hand. Not quite yet, but we've got the law on our side now. That's something. The investigation took 3 weeks. During that time, Dalton's men kept their distance, and Clara began the work of restoring her ranch. She hired new hands, tended to the cattle, and started repairs on the house. Yates stayed, working alongside her from dawn to dusk, and spending evenings on the porch watching the sun set over the valley. They didn't talk much about what was growing between them. They didn't need to. It was there in every glance, every touch, every moment they spent in each other's company. Clara had never imagined she could feel this way about someone, this bone-deep certainty that he was meant to be part of her life. When the marshal finally returned, he brought news that Marcus Dalton had been arrested on charges of land fraud, intimidation, and bribery of local officials. Several of his hired men had turned witness for the prosecution in exchange for lighter sentences. The railroad had distanced itself from his actions, claiming they had no knowledge of his illegal methods. Your land is secure, Miss Owens, Marshal Green said, and you'll likely receive compensation for the damage to your property. Dalton's assets are being seized to repay the victims of his schemes. That night, Clara and Yates sat on the porch steps in the warm June darkness, passing a bottle of her father's good whiskey back and forth. So what now? She asked. You're a free man. You've fulfilled your contract. Yates was quiet for a moment, staring out at the dark shapes of hills against the starlit sky. Clara, I need to tell you something. When I came to California, I was running. I'd left Arizona after some trouble, and I was planning to just keep drifting until I found something or someone to give me a reason to stop. What kind of trouble? The kind where I shot a man who needed shooting, but his friends didn't see it that way. He took a drink. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed either. He was gonna hurt someone and I stopped him, but it meant I couldn't stay. Clara absorbed this, then said, "And now?" He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting starlight. "Now I've found my reason to stop. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay. Not as a hired hand, but as your partner. In the ranch, in your life, in everything." Her heart swelled until she thought it might overflow. "Yates Owens, are you proposing to me?" "I suppose I am, though I'm making a hash of it." He set down the bottle and took both her hands in his. "I love you, Clara. I love your courage and your stubbornness and the way you fight for what's yours. I love the way you shoot and the way you ride and the way you look at sunrise when you think I'm not watching. I want to build a life with you here on this land, if you'll let me." "Yes," she said, the word coming out halfway between a laugh and a sob. "Yes, of course, yes." He kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promise, and Clara thought about how strange life was. 3 months ago she'd been alone and desperate, ready to lose everything. Now she had her land, her freedom, and the love of a good man who saw her as an equal partner in all things. They were married a month later in the small church in Winnetka, with the whole town in attendance. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than they could possibly eat. Even old James Patterson and his family came back from Sacramento for the occasion, pleased to see that standing up to Dalton had paid off for everyone. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and when Yates saw her walking down the aisle, the look on his face made her want to cry and laugh at the same time. They spoke their vows in front of God and witnesses, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived. The first year of marriage was hard work but good work. They rebuilt the ranch together, expanding the herd and improving the land. Yates proved to be not just a skilled cowboy but a smart businessman, negotiating fair prices for their cattle and establishing good relationships with buyers in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Clara found that sharing the burden made everything easier. Having someone to discuss decisions with, to plan with, to simply sit in comfortable silence with at the end of a long day, it changed everything. They fought sometimes, both of them too stubborn to back down easily, but they always made up before bed, remembering what mattered most. In the spring of 1887, Clara discovered she was pregnant. Yates was so excited he picked her up and spun her around the kitchen until she was dizzy and laughing and begging him to put her down. "We're having a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We're having a baby." Their son was born in January of 1888, a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him James, after Clara's father, and he was the joy of their lives. Yates was a devoted father, carrying the baby everywhere, singing to him, telling him stories about the ranch and the land and everything they would teach him when he was older. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Grace, who had her mother's fierce spirit from the moment she entered the world. And then another son, Robert, in 1892, completing their family. The ranch prospered. Other families who had been driven out by Dalton returned and rebuilt, and the community grew stronger. Clara and Yates became pillars of Winnetka, respected not just for what they'd survived but for how they treated others with fairness and dignity. On summer evenings, when the work was done and the children were asleep, Clara and Yates would sit on the porch like they had that first night after the marshal's visit. They would talk about the day, make plans for tomorrow, and simply enjoy being together. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked one such evening in the summer of 1895. 10 years had passed since that morning when bullets shattered her kitchen window. "Staying here, I mean, settling down." Yates pulled her closer on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders. Not for a single second. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even with 3 wild children and a wife who's still too stubborn for her own good. He laughed. Especially because of that. He kissed the top of her head. You know what I think about sometimes? What would have happened if you hadn't walked into that saloon? If Dutch hadn't pointed me out to you? I think I would have found some other way to fight. Maybe not as successfully, but I would have tried. I know you would have, but I'm grateful you found me. You gave me something I didn't even know I was looking for. What's that? Home. Purpose. A reason to be better than I was. He turned her face up to his and kissed her softly. You saved me as much as I helped save this ranch. Clara smiled against his lips. Then I'd say we're even. They sat together as darkness fell and stars emerged overhead. The same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, the births of their children. The land stretched out around them, hard-won and hard-kept, a legacy they would pass on to James and Grace and Robert someday. Clara thought about her father sometimes, wondered what he would think of how things had turned out. She liked to believe he'd be proud. Proud that she'd fought for what was theirs. Proud that she'd found a partner worthy of the Owens name. Proud that the ranch was thriving under their care. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. They expanded the ranch, buying up land from neighbors who were ready to retire, until the Owens spread was one of the largest in the county. The railroad came through eventually, but on fair terms, bringing prosperity rather than destruction. James grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the land as much as his parents did. Grace became a skilled horsewoman who could outride and outshoot most of the cowboys they employed. Robert showed a talent for numbers and business, keeping the ranch accounts with meticulous precision. In 1903, James married a schoolteacher from Los Angeles, a smart woman named Eleanor who fit seamlessly into the family. They had their first child, a boy named Yates after his grandfather, in 1904. Holding her grandson for the first time, Clara felt the circle complete somehow, the continuation of everything she and Yates had built together. They grew old together on that land, watching seasons change and children grow and grandchildren arrive. Yates's hair went silver at the temples, then fully white, but his eyes remained the same storm cloud gray that had captured Clara's heart that day in the saloon. Clara's dark hair streaked with white as well, and her hands grew weathered from decades of ranch work, but Yates still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1916, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. 3 children, for grandchildren, and half the county turned out to honor Clara and Yates Owens and the legacy they'd built. There were speeches and toasts and a fiddle band that played until dawn. Late in the evening, Clara and Yates slipped away from the party and walked up the hill where her father was buried. The valley spread out below them, lights from the ranch house twinkling in the darkness, music and laughter carrying on the warm summer air. 30 years, Clara said, leaning against Yates's shoulder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. Best 30 years of my life, Yates said. Every single day of them. Even the hard ones? Especially the hard ones. Those are the days that proved what we built could last. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together looking out over the land they'd fought for, the life they'd created. I love you, Clara. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that. I love you too, she whispered. Always. They stood there until the stars wheeled overhead and the party finally wound down below. Then they walked back down the hill together, hand in hand, ready for whatever years remained to them. Clara had been 23 when Dalton's men first came to drive her off her land. She'd been terrified but determined, alone but unbroken. She'd fought because she had no other choice, because giving up meant betraying everything her father had worked for. But what she'd gained was so much more than just the land. She'd found love and partnership, built a family and a legacy, created something that would last long after she was gone. The ranch would pass to James and Eleanor someday, and then to young Yates after that, carrying the Owens name into the future. They'd tried to drive her off her land, but she hadn't left without a fight. And in fighting, she'd won not just her home but her whole life, everything that mattered most. The land was still hers, would always be hers, but more than that, her heart belonged to the gray-eyed cowboy who'd helped her defend it, and his heart belonged to her in return. That was the true victory, the one that meant more than any deed or title. Love, freely given and faithfully kept, built on mutual respect and shared struggles and the simple determination to face life together, whatever it brought. Years later, when Clara finally passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87, with Yates holding her hand, she died knowing she'd lived a full and meaningful life. Yates followed her just 6 months later, unable to bear the world without her in it. They were buried together on the hill overlooking the valley, beside her father, with a simple stone that read, Clara and Yates Owens. Together they stood their ground. The ranch continued for generations after that, the story of how Clara fought to keep it becoming family legend. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren told the tale of the woman who wouldn't be driven off her land, and the cowboy who loved her enough to help her fight. It became a story about courage and determination, about standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. But most of all, it became a love story, about two people who found each other in the hardest of circumstances and built something beautiful that lasted far beyond their own lives. The kind of love that changes everything, that makes you braver and stronger and more than you ever thought you could be. The kind of love worth fighting for, worth holding on to, worth building a whole life around. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy Clara and Yates left behind, greater than the land or the cattle or the thriving ranch. They left behind proof that true love exists, that it's worth fighting for, and that when you find it, you hold on with everything you have and never let go.